morning. All right, so today we're going to do Lesson 19 in Heritage Studies. We're going to be talking about cowboys and longhorns out on the frontier. This is going to be a great lesson. I think you're going to like this one. All right, so before we get started, I want to ask you a few questions about yesterday's lesson that we did. Do you remember the place that the two railroads started? Remember the ones that came together? One started in Sacramento, California, and the other one started in Omaha, Nebraska. And where did they come together? Do you remember? Promontory Summit, Utah, May the 10th, 1869. Do you remember the two immigrant groups that were hired to do a lot of the work? The Chinese and the Irish. Let me try to fix my thing here. The Chinese and the Irish were hired to do it. Which one of those groups tended to be the best? The Chinese did. They had a great diet. They worked well together, and they didn't cause any trouble. So they were the best. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. Let's look at page 60 in your book. Okay, so on page 60, the title says Cowboys and Longhorns, the Frontier. And look at page 61, Life as a Cowboy. Now, I want you to read these pages yourself, okay? And I know it looks like a lot in there, but it's a lot of really cool stuff about cowboys and the frontiers and stuff about the Longhorns. And as you read, I want you to be thinking about and try to see if you can find the answer to why the Longhorns were so important. And so that's what I want you to listen for, okay? Now, when you're finished reading these two pages, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So make sure you read and pay attention, okay? Pay close attention. And remember, as you read, be thinking about why were the Longhorns so important? Because I'm going to ask you some questions about them when you're done. Okay? All right, and then when you're finished, we're going to look at cattle brands and cattle drives. So if you'll pause it and go ahead and read these two pages to yourself and then turn it back on and we'll talk about it. Did you read the two pages? Well, why were Longhorns so important? They were valuable. People that lived in the eastern cities and the western towns, they ate their meat, they used their hides, and they were very valuable. So that means now they had ranchers that would round up these Longhorns, and they were becoming wealthy. And then they would have to ship them up north by use of a cattle drive to get them up to, remember that railroad it was up north. Remember that map we looked at yesterday? And it went across the United States. That was the only railroad that they could use. So they had to drive the cattle up north, which was a long way, and get them up there to that railroad so that then they could be transported on the rail cars and sold so they would make their money. Now, remember too, what was it that the Indians used so much of? They used buffalo. Buffalo. What did they use buffalo for? They used it for food, for clothing, for shelter, everything. The buffalo was so important to them. And then there started to be less and less buffalo. So then the Indians didn't have a lot to live on. Now, look at page 61 on life as a cowboy in the 1860s and the 1870s. Lots of people. What kinds of people went to become cowboys? Immigrants, white Americans, freedmen, Indians, Mexicans, almost anybody. What kind of skills did they need, though, to be a cowboy? They needed to be very brave and very strong. They needed to be good with a horse. They needed to be good with a rope. They had to be able to survive long, hot summer days and kind of chilly nights at night. What is the man in charge of the cattle drive? What's he called? The trail boss. All right, look at page 62 at the top. This is a diagram of a cattle drive. You see the trail boss up there at the front? His job is to look out, make sure everything's good, the coast is clear, keep on a-coming. Plus, he had to make sure that all the other guys were doing their jobs. Look over, you see the cook and the wagon. He's in the wagon. He's kind of over on the side so he doesn't scare the cattle with, because I'm sure a bunch of pots and pans clanging and banging against each other. That might scare them. Do you see the point riders right underneath the trail boss? The point riders, they would ride at the front of the herd on both sides, and that was to keep them kind of in this way. Do you see the swing riders and the flank riders? Their job was on the outside of the cattle drive to make sure that they kind of stayed in. There's a drag rider at the back. He did kind of sort of what the trail boss did, but at the back. Looking over, making sure the herd's okay. You better get him back in there. Scoot him back in there. So he had his job was at the back. And the other guy, the wrangler, he was at the very back. And he had to hold all the extra horses. How many horses did each cowboy need? 8 to 10 each to do this, because a horse would get sick, it would get hurt, it might die, it was too tired, they had to get a fresh horse, so they always had to have fresh horses. And so that's why they had to have a wrangler in the back to keep the extra horses, so that they would have extra horses. Look at page 63. At the very top there, you see that branded longhorn bull, and right above it is that long metal thing. That's a brand. That's a cattle brand. Each longhorn in a herd had a special symbol on its side. The symbols, called brands, stood for the ranches the cattle had come from. Cowboys burned the symbol onto each cow's hide with a hot branding iron. Brands helped the cowboys know whom each longhorn belonged to. Brands also made it hard for thieves to steal cattle. So they'd have those brands on them. There's a picture of one there. Let's read right below there. And remember, I'm going to read this section, and your job is to follow along with me as I read, okay? As the herd moved along, cowboys had to stay alert. Many things could upset the cattle, especially at night when they could not see well. A loud clap of thunder, a gunshot might scare them. They could be surprised by a leaping jackrabbit or a deer. Even small sounds like the clatter of a tin pan or the snap of a twig sometimes would spook a herd. When the herd became frightened, a stampede might take place. Stampeding cattle scattered and ran wildly away from the trail, sometimes for miles. It might take the cowboys days to round up the herd again after a stampede. The cowboys' work was so tiring. When they stopped to camp, cowboys could relax and enjoy some free time. They often held contests. They told jokes and stories, probably stories like Pecos Bill, don't you think? I think so. They'd sing songs, and some of these boys, these songs that they sang, people still sing them today. So that's some information about the cattle drives and the cattle brands. Now, I want to go ahead and give you your assignment. If you'll look in your work text on page 27, there's 10 questions there. And all of this comes from all the section that we just read about cowboys, okay? So I'd like for you to answer these questions on here. And I'm going to grade this page. It ought to be really easy. If you don't know the answer, look back in your book and find the answer, because it's all in there. Now, the second assignment I want you to do is I want you to pretend that you own a ranch. You're a rancher and you've got lots of cattle and you want to put a stamp on your cattle, a brand. So you need to think about a name for your ranch, and then you need to design the brand that you would have all your cows, all your cattle branded with to prove that they belonged to you. Now, I'm going to change screens and I'm going to show you of some examples of some brands that might kind of give you an idea, okay? And then I'd like to see your brand. Well, I'd like for you to snap a picture of it and send it to me, and make sure you have the name of your ranch on there too, so that I'll know what it is, okay? All right, so let me show you some of those right quick. All right. Here's a picture of a cow with some different designs. Now yours, of course, can be anything you want it to be. So let's look at this one. This one is N Bar N. That's the name of this brand. I guess it's the name of their ranch. Here's one, Bar LC. This one is CMR. This is the 2 dot. Running in Bar. Here's one, Bar Diamond. This one is 7 hanging 7. See, there's a 7 and another 7. 7 hanging 7. Here's Circle. Well, that's pretty easy. What about Rafter NZ? This one is T Diamond. This one's Diamond Dot. S Bar Diamond. All right, these are just some examples of different things. You can come up with your own name for your own ranch and your own design for your cattle. And I'd like to see it, okay? So your assignment is to do page 27 for a grade and design your own brand for your cattle. And that will be all for today.